Naeem, appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah, Ashraf.
Thank
Strategic
you.
reflection.
Well, that's it. Yeah, actually, I wrote my things and I can't remember what I wrote down there. Thanks for correcting me. Right. Let's talk about the strategy around what's happened in Yemen. So what's the plan in terms of some pronouncements by Saudi Arabia? I understand, right?
Well, the Saudis are not making too many pronouncements. They're keeping quiet. But things are happening, and there are statements coming from the Yemeni side. Just yesterday, a Saudi delegation and Omani delegation arrived in Sana'a to talk to the Houthis and move the process forward. Over the past few weeks, there's been a release of prisoners. The truce that was negotiated by the UN and kind of more or less, was adhered to for about a year, ended in October, but that is continuing, and now it seems that that will be made a permanent truce. The port of Aden is being reopened, and Saudis are not insisting that ships must stop in Saudi Arabia first to be checked, etc. This will have a huge impact, of course, on what is regarded by the UN and others as the currently the biggest humanitarian crisis in the world. These ports reopening means aid can flow in easily, quickly, be distributed quickly, and I think that on the ground, that the war stopping and the humanitarian aid coming in is going to make the biggest difference.
Mm. But let's go back. You said, the US, if I heard you correctly, brokered
UN, UN,
a truce, right? Did you say UN or US?
the United Nations.
United Nations. Okay, that's a big difference, right? Okay, so the UN negotiated a truce, which is not the end of the debate, but at least there was a ceasefire in terms of no attacks since October, right? So, what do you think has happened since then to effectively move from a position of truce to like let's back off completely and this battle is over?
So the UN mediated truce started in October 2021 and ended in October 2022. But the fighting hasn't resumed full scale since October 2022, and now we're in a point where it's going to become permanent. I mean, clearly the issue, the development that has made the change that we're seeing now is a month ago the agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran that was brokered by China. In a very, very quickly brokered by China, signed in China, and last week, I think it was on Thursday, when Iranian and Chinese delegation and Iranian and Saudi delegations went again to China to talk about how the agreement would be moved forward. On the face of it at the time, it seemed like it was going to be simply a revival of diplomatic links between the two countries. But things moved pretty fast subsequently. I mean, the Saudi king has invited the Iranian president for an official visit. There's been exchange of visits between the two countries at ministerial level. Development started unfolding in Yemen. We might see things taking place in Lebanon, where both of these countries have enormous influence. So the situation in Yemen that we're seeing now comes, in a sense, directly out of that Chinese mediated agreement about a month ago between Saudi Arabia and Iran.
And I suppose, and I'm looking at, even South Africa's foreign minister, Naledi Pandor, being asked to do something about the Russian premier coming to South Africa during that BRICS summit later on in the year. I'm just saying that because in her pronouncements since then, you can see, geopolitics and global politics are so complex. We don't quite understand it. How does it happen where there's like no talking even between Saudi Arabia and Iran for years, and then suddenly in a space of days, things just turn around completely? Well, what is your understanding, therefore, if we go back to that issue, in terms of how China was able to influence those two regional powers when nobody else could do so over these years?
Well, one thing we should just note is that there was an Iraqi process that was underway, and I think the Omanis had some role as well, for more than a year. It didn't make too much progress. There were quiet meetings at low levels between officials. And then, Iraq fell into its own problems over the past few months, or bigger problems in the past few months. And that process kind of was more or less suspended. But if we remember in terms of the timeline, Ashraf, the meeting in China took place, within weeks, I think it was, or a month at the most, of Xi Jinping visiting Saudi Arabia. And on his visit to Saudi Arabia, there was a proposal for an oil deal, China purchasing Saudi oil for a long term contract. Now, on the one hand, of course, China and Iran have a great relationship, and China at the moment, because of all the sanctions on Iran, which keep getting harsher and harsher, particularly from the United States, and the United States imposes secondary sanctions, which means that if the United States sanctions Iran, secondary sanctions means that if any other country deals with Iran, they will also face American sanctions. So
Yeah.
Iran has been under sanctions for more than 40 years, from 1979. And so China is Iran's largest purchaser of oil. So the relationship between China and Iran at an economic level, at a political level, etc., is very strong. The China-Saudi relationship has been basically economic, as it is with China and most other countries, and particularly around the purchase of oil. With the Saudi relationship with the United States kind of cooling over the past year or so, um, Saudi Arabia is, in a sense, playing the field. They're improving their relationships with Russia. They're improving their relationship with China, and others. And so, they're sending a signal that they're no longer completely beholden to the United States as they once were. So, with China wanting to conclude a long-term oil purchasing deal from Saudi Arabia, the conclusion of those talks was that it's not entirely smart to have a deal with a regional power when it's in an ongoing confrontation with another regional power. A long-term deal, 20 years, 30 years, whatever the case might be, could be jeopardized by a
Mm,
war,
mm, mm, mm.
the Yemen war spilling over into Saudi Arabia directly, or whatever other factors. And so the Chinese undertook very uncharacteristically to mediate this political agreement. I say uncharacteristically because if we look at China's role in the broader Middle East, in Africa, and elsewhere, it's very much economic.
Yeah. Yeah.
They are very wary of getting involved in political matters. So one wonders whether, and I know many commentators are saying this is the beginning of China playing a greater role, etc. I'm a little more skeptical. I think this might be a once-off thing for economic interests. But really, this is where all of this came from. No progress, as you say, since 2016, when diplomatic links were cut, when Saudi Arabia closed its embassy in Tehran. Seemingly no progress at all, and then suddenly, within a few weeks, everything kind of came together.
Goodness, don't we wish the Israel Palestinian issue would be resolved in the same way? And I mean, in a just way. Another conversation for another time, right? Let's pick up in terms of the war, this war between or this war in Yemen, right? If we can reflect, what was this war about? I mean, why did it start? And you made the point about this humanitarian crisis, which does suggest it had a devastating effect on the people, the Yemenis, right? So yeah, why did it start? What was the impact really like on the people?
So, in a sense, it started in 2014. The Houthis, who have long had grievances about being marginalized, etc., and based in the north of Yemen, grievances about being marginalized in terms of the way the state was run, in terms of government positions, all of those kinds of things, and feeling that they were left as kind of outcasts in the Yemeni system, politically and economically, but commanding great military strength. threatened and then moved on the capital Sana'a in 2014. The government that was in place at the time was regarded as something of a kind of Saudi proxy. The government fell very quickly, um, and the president and his government moved to Saudi Arabia. And within a few months, in 2015, the Saudis then began attacking Yemen and attacking the Houthis, or Ansarullah as they call themselves. Um, those attacks became pretty severe all over the country, and the United Arab Emirates joined in, particularly in the southern part of the country, trying to kind of close the Houthis in. The Saudis believed at the time that the attack, that the war would last a few months at the most, a few weeks, perhaps a few months at the most, and that was in 2015. So we're now looking at almost 8 years later. The war has more or less continued for, let's say, 7 years. And the Saudi bombing and the UAE supported attacks from the south have been quite comprehensive in terms of where in the country it has happened. Aid has not been allowed in. Cities have been bombed. I mean, many parts of Yemen have been reduced to rubble. And big powers such as the United States, even others on the UN Security Council, China, Russia, etc., didn't really do much in order to help resolve the situation. The United States supported Saudi Arabia and provided it with weapons, etc., as did the UK and others, or Britain and others. The United Nations had a Yemeni peace envoy, changed 2 or 3 times. But it was the UN envoy who, in 2021 October, managed to broker a temporary peace. I think it was partly from the Yemeni side, war weariness, and similarly from the Saudi side, the feeling that they had been caught in a kind of a quagmire, Vietnam, that the US
Mm,
had
mm, mm,
in their, not on another continent, but in their backyard. And so they wanted some way of getting out of it, and a temporary ceasefire was a way of taking a break. And now we have this.
and the impact in terms of destruction and in terms of lives of the people of Yemen over the period of 7 8 years.
Well, infrastructural destruction has been huge. I mean, I don't have the figures in front of me, but infrastructural destruction has been huge. Tens of thousands of people killed in the war, and with the lack of aid coming in, diseases spread, and so even people that didn't die, the malnutrition, the starvation, cholera, all kinds of diseases, etc. The population has been reduced both physically and psychologically to quite a mess.
So
And I
in effect,
think,
like a whole country's been wiped out. I mean, physically the country's there, but it's been wiped out. Yeah.
well, not the whole country, but large parts
Yeah,
of it,
yeah,
yes.
absolutely. Let me go back, maybe, sorry, to the issue you brought up before we wrap up, right? You spoke about this subtly friendly relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the two powers in the region, brokered by the Chinese, but also maybe less dependence between Saudi Arabia and the USA. Now, I'm thinking Saudi Arabia's friendliness with the USA, the UAE's friendliness with the USA, has also seen those countries' friendliness and the opening up of relationships with Israel. Do you see that then changing very soon?
From the UAE, no. I think they have made some noises after the attack on Aqsa, but no. I mean, all indications are that their relationship with Israel is continuing and strengthening economically and otherwise. Saudi Arabia, I think, Saudi Arabia hasn't officially normalized relations, though under the table there are some relations. There
Mm.
have been. But I think that the Saudis will be much more wary of normalizing relations. When Bahrain normalized relations with Israel, I mean, Bahrain is regarded as a kind of test balloon for the Saudis. When Bahrain normalized relations, everyone was watching to see how Saudi would then respond after a certain period. If they thought that the relationship with Bahrain was going well, they might too. But at the moment, it doesn't seem that's going to be the case. I think it won't be good for Saudi Arabia to do that, and to normalize relations with Iran is extremely important in a region where, if they believe, as I think they do, the Saudis, that they cannot anymore rely on the United States to provide kind of protection for them and stability in the region. And you may think about the U.S. role in Iran, the U.S. role in Afghanistan, and the messes that they left behind there. So the feeling is that they can't rely on the US to guarantee stability, and they have to do it themselves. Doing it themselves means talking directly to the regional rival and coming to some agreement. They don't have to be friends, but they have to come to an agreement where they recognize each other's position, each other's spheres of influence, and see how that can work best. Now, I think there's a factor here which you mentioned, Ashraf, which we shouldn't forget. We shouldn't exaggerate, but we shouldn't forget either, and that is the UAE. The UAE can be a spoiler in this process if they want, although the UAE, ahead of Saudi Arabia, re-established diplomatic links with Syria, re-established links with Iran even before Saudi Arabia, etc. But in Yemen, for example, the UAE, over the past 3-4 years, has been a bit of at a bit of loggerheads with the Saudis as well, because the UAE is supporting the southern secessionist movement in in Yemen, and they are insisting right now that they want secession. They want to break from Yemen, and neither the Saudis nor the Houthis want that. So you could find a that difference blowing up in the southern part of Yemen between the UAE and Saudi Arabia. How that might play out on a broader theater is yet to be seen. But I think that all is not clear yet.
And that's yeah, that's an issue to follow, because I'm just looking back at the Arab Spring, and how the onset of democracy, which I think was just fabulous through North Africa and the Middle East, but also sparked of very immediately massive vacuums, and that created obviously we've seen destroyed states, Libya as an example, and then Syria very, very quickly thereafter. We pray that doesn't happen. Naeem Jina, I appreciate your time. Thanks for the insights, and hopefully we'll chat again soon in the week that I have left for Ramadan on the show. We'll see what happens. I appreciate your time.
Assalamu alaikum.
There we are. Fascinating insights there from Naeem Jina, senior researcher at the Mahkum Bugwe Institute. And I got a strategic reflection because I spelt it, I wrote it correctly. Didn't read my own handwriting early on. So that changed, right? Still to come, important issues around champion spotting, the Imam profile, and my first Ramadan right after this.